Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for coming to this Fringe meeting organised by the European Movement in the UK. My apologies to those who are not able to get a comfortable seat or even a comfortable stand. When I take my son and daughter to football matches, I'm often in a long queue for a drink and entertained by the sign on the wall that's saying, everybody all over the world is experiencing labour shortages. Please don't be rude to those who have turned up for work and are going to serve your drink. And I detect that there is a large unmet desire to discuss matters European at this conference, so please do not vent your fury on those who have turned up for work and organised an opportunity for you to do so. Daisy Cooper will be joining us in a minute, but we think we'd better begin on time, and it's my pleasure to introduce the panel this evening. I'm Nick Harvey, the Chief Executive of the European Movement. With us we have Jane Dodds, the leader of the Liberal Democrats in Wales, Vince Cable, who I'm sure needs no introduction as a former business secretary and leader of the party, Jürgen, I'm going to bungle your name, Maier, who is the former chief executive of Siemens in the UK, and as I say, Daisy Cooper will be joining us very shortly. The European movement was set up in the aftermath of World War II by, among others, Churchill, to work for and campaign for European unity and a union of the European nations. It was at its heyday in the 1970s when we acceded to the European Economic Community, and at its nadir in 2016 when the referendum took us out. But the European movement is in good fettle now with a growing membership, a growing support, growing levels of campaigning capacity, and our purpose, put simply, is to get the United Kingdom back into the European Union, and we are the largest and longest established campaign organisation in the UK aiming to do that. Before, however, we can go back into the European Union, three things have to happen. Firstly, a British government has to take a huge gamble, some might say an existential gamble, by seeking accession to the European Union. Secondly, Europe itself has to agree to let us back in, and on terms that are mutually acceptable. And thirdly, the British public will have to demonstrate overwhelmingly in a referendum that it is the settled will of the British people that we want to go back in, because Europe sure as heck aren't going to take us back if they're just going to renew the psychodrama, the melodrama of Britain's ambivalent attitudes on Brexit. We recognise that that is going to take some considerable time to achieve, and we have a step-by-step process by which we aim to achieve it. And the first of those steps is calling out what is going wrong and pointing out to the public that the difficulties we are experiencing on many different fronts, from the added trade costs, the fact that our rivers are being polluted because we have abandoned European environmental standards, the difficulties that people are having travelling back and forth, the shocking labour shortages in our hospitals, our care sector, hospitality, agriculture, it goes on. The ramifications of Brexit are everywhere to be seen. So step one is pointing this out. Step two is trying to find some practical solutions while the process of stepping further back towards the European Union can take place. And that is the purpose, the focus and the objective of this evening's Fringe meeting. We have conducted a survey of small and medium-sized enterprises, both those belonging to the European movement and many who don't, finding out from them what the real practical ramifications of leaving the world's largest and most lucrative market are proving to be in practice. We've had a very, very good response to this, which has enabled us both to compile data and to collect stories from those who really are at the sharp end. So I commend this report to you, but the purpose of bringing together Jürgen Maier and Vince with their business backgrounds and Daisy and Jane with their political backgrounds is to probe this further and consider what steps we can take to get access to that lucrative market restored to British companies. Now, Jane and Daisy, I think, are both in a position where they're going to have to get away relatively soon. So I'm going to ask Jane if she's happy to start, and I shall come to Daisy after that. Thank you.
So, noswaith dda, gwych bod yma. Good evening, it's lovely to be here. That's a European language that isn't English. It is a matter of huge regret to me that Wales voted out. And I'm here, I think, just to kind of bring you up to date with what's happening as far as I can tell in Wales. I'm very grateful that you've offered an opportunity to a devolved nation to be on this panel. We are often forgotten, if I'm honest. Scotland and Wales, as you know, have their own devolved governments, and that means that everyday issues, education, health, environment, etc., are settled by our devolved governments. We have very little to do with the Westminster Parliament in terms of controls, but the big one that we do obviously have is our international relations. There's a small town which Vince will know well called Dodds, which is about 30 miles from me. And about 3 years ago, they conducted a survey on their dental provision. I'm sure, like many of you, Wales is struggling to find NHS dentists. Now, this town, Dodds, I don't have the stats, but overwhelmingly voted to leave the EU. In fact, I remember knocking on a door there in 2019, and a lady came to the door and she said, "I'm voting for Boris Johnson." I said, "Do you like him?" "No." "Do you trust him?" "Oh, no." But guess what? He's going to get Brexit done. Going back to Dodds and that survey on dentists, a massive concern around people actually not being able to access dental provision. I'm sure you can rehearse the arguments yourselves. But what started to twig for people is that very soon after the referendum result, 2 female dentists, one from Bulgaria and one from Romania, left Dodds to return to their home countries because they didn't feel welcome. And people started to think, hang on, we are now without a dentist here in Dodds, and that's the reason. There are other issues, of course, that are pertinent to many of us, but I'll talk a little bit about farming. The area I represent, Mid and West Wales, I'm in the Welsh Parliament on a PR basis. Can I just quick plug for Wales, in 2026 our Senedd elections are all going to be by PR with 50% gender quotas as well. Now that's the first nation in the UK. Well, it's not entirely down to me, although fair play to Mark Drakeford and Welsh Labour. They have pushed it through. They're about to hit a buffer, I'm sure, in terms of legislative competence on one of those issues with the UK government, until we get Keir Starmer in, of course, and then it'll be a clear road through. But 2026 is going to be a different year for us. But I was elected by PR, and I serve the region of Mid and West Wales. Now, Mid and West Wales, for any of you who know Wales, goes from the coast, Ceredigion, Pembrokeshire, Dwyfor, Meirionnydd, Llanelli, over to the border, that's Powys and Montgomeryshire, and everything in between. I represent more sheep than people. The farming community, obviously, we're really concerned about the trade with Europe, and there is no statistical evidence that says that farmers as a whole voted out. There isn't any evidence. In fact, their unions, the NFU, and for us in Wales, the FUW, the Farmers Union of Wales, recommended that farmers voted to remain. However, the anecdotal evidence tells us that they wanted to leave. The sovereignty issue, etc., meant that they thought it would be better out than in. Now, what we're hearing almost on a daily basis is that that is not a decision that has helped them in any way whatsoever. I'm never going to get to the point where they will say, I'm wrong. However, that is where many of those farmers are at. In 2021, for our Senedd elections, I'm afraid we were well ahead of you, because we worked with the Wales FSB and we published a small business manifesto just for the Senedd elections. And in that manifesto, our conclusion and recommendation was for us to rejoin the single market and the customs union. And we were out on that absolutely clearly from day one, and that's still where we lie. Now, we may have a little bit of a rub here with the Federal Party, I'm not sure, we're waiting here. But we have been really clear that we need to rejoin the single market and the customs union. Just to conclude, we have to be brave and we have to talk about these issues. My view is that we haven't done enough to do that, and I and many of us in Wales are doing that. We are really out saying the Welsh Liberal Democrats want us to rejoin the single market and the customs union, and we want to be able to hear and to talk about that path to rejoining the EU. And in conclusion, I think that's what we need to be doing and getting it out there.
Now, I have had a small telling off from our technical team because I've set a bad example by standing up and then not having a microphone very close to me. So, Daisy, would you be happy to speak sitting, or do you want the handheld microphone? Handheld, that's it.
Yeah. I'm a real fidget, so I love standing. I absolutely hate sitting down. So there we go. Well, thank you all so much for coming. It's fantastic to see such a crowded room. Let's start at the beginning. Brexit has been an unmitigated disaster. None of us are going to disagree with that, I hope. We know that our small businesses have been wrapped up in red tape. We know that our farmers have been sold down the river. We know that our NHS and care services have lost a lot of their staff, including hospitality. You will know that I am the MP for St Albans. St Albans voted 63% Remain. We had a fairly large population from various different European countries, and St Albans for Europe was the largest European movement grassroots group. So large, in fact, that they actually went round setting up all the other groups around Hertfordshire and in many other places beyond. And we're incredibly proud of that fact. So we're not only did my constituency vote Remain, but we're an activist base for that Remain movement. We went on, I think, every single march in London. I went on one of them in a wheelchair because I'd had a foot operation. My poor husband had blisters on his hand the next day. We went all out like everybody else did to try and stop Brexit. But we didn't. And it was devastating. And I won in 2019, one of the very few people that did. It was a huge honour. It was very exciting for me and my team. And I was smiling from ear to ear when the result was announced. And I got off stage, and the first question that was put to me was, and how do you feel about the fact that Jo Swinson has lost her seat? And I didn't know. And I was live on air at about 5 a.m. And that's the moment where you have to put your big girl pants on. You're exhausted after a 6-week campaign, and you feel sick to your stomach, and you put your candidate face on and say, this is a big loss for British politics, but I'm sure we're going to do really well as the night goes on. But we didn't, did we? And it was a really tough night, because actually within the space of 3 days, I had 3,000 emails to deal with. When you get elected, it's a real shock. I went to the count that night, and as I was in the taxi arriving at the sports hall where they do the count, I had 6 unread emails across all of my inboxes. In the morning, after we'd had the count, had my breakfast, I had 200, and by Monday morning, 3,000. And you suddenly realise how many people are in a state of crisis. And it took probably about 3 months until I actually had the bandwidth to process how I felt about that emotion, and the bandwidth to work out how I felt about the fact that we'd left the EU. And when I had the time to do that, It was the night I was asked to go and speak to St Albans for Europe on the night of their very last meeting before they disbanded, and they wanted to know what I thought. And what I said to them was, you guys have been amazing. You've been an activist base, not just here in St Albans, but across the whole of Hertfordshire. But Brexit was always going to be the start of a lot of other awful things that the Conservative Party wanted to do. Brexit was never the end destination. It was the start to bring in a whole new way of doing politics, to do all sorts of things, to cut our environmental regulations, our standards, all those kind of things. And it's going to be a long way back. I said, but consider yourselves a sleeping giant. One day, we may need you again. But in the meantime, have a rest. Meanwhile, in Parliament, as a parliamentary party, we've been thinking about what can we do? What do we do in this new environment in which we find ourselves? And so we convened a group of experts, European experts, professors and people who worked in European academia and had worked in Europe and business people, and they came up with our roadmap, our 4-stage plan, which we often talk about. It wasn't a leadership initiative, it was all these experts that we pulled together and said, what do we do? And they convened this 4-stage plan. And as far as I'm concerned, all of us here, all of us in the party should agree that Brexit is a terrible thing and it's only had a lot of damage. All of us, I hope, can say that we're internationalists and that internationalism is in our veins as Liberals. All of us should be able to agree that we have a roadmap, and we should be really proud of the fact we are the only UK-wide party, probably the only political party that has set out a roadmap as how we can be back in the heart of Europe again. But there's a question of emphasis, and I think there's a question of language. On language, I think we have to be incredibly careful not to slip back into using the language of the past. Being Remainers and Brexiters was so divisive. I don't know about you, but it made life very difficult in my family. It still does at Christmas. Anyway, enough about that. We have got to take the country with us. We have got to take the country with us. The fact, and I think we have, not just have we set out this roadmap, we have a moral responsibility as internationalists to take the public with us and show them how we can rebuild that relationship and how we can build that trust. So I think we should be proud of the fact that we have a roadmap, and we can talk about the fact we have that roadmap, but the language matters. We can't go back to the division of the past. We have got to talk about the future and what those future stages are. But there is also a question of emphasis. And I don't know about you, I don't know how many of you are councillors or how many of you knock on doors, but I can tell you that our country is in a state of complete and utter crisis. Hopefully you will all recognise that. I get desperate emails on a daily basis from people who can't afford their mortgages, they can't afford their rent, they can't afford their bills, they can't afford their food, they can't see a GP, they can't get a mental health nurse, they can't get their SEND assessment. On a daily basis, people's eyes are so stuck in the daily grind of how difficult life is under this Conservative government. They just can't lift their eyes. They haven't got the bandwidth to think about those big issues to do with UK and EU relations. There hopefully will come a time when they will. But in the meantime, I think that for us to be relevant as a political party, we have got to talk about the NHS, we have got to talk about the cost of living, we have got to give people the answers to the things that they are finding crippling in their daily lives. But the fact that we focus on that as an emphasis does not mean that it diminishes our passion one iota. It just means that we have to focus on those things for now. So those are my opening remarks. Thank you very, very much. I'm sorry that I'll have to run away in 10, 12 minutes or so. But thank you all for coming. It's a real honour and pleasure to talk to you all. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes. Are you ready to stand?
No, I think I'll stay sitting. It's a lovely microphone, and it seems to be working. So I'll be sort of coming at this from a business viewpoint, and as a business person who actually back in the day Vince asked to join his board when Vince was Secretary of State at the Department of Business, and I was a proud member of the non-executive member of the Department of Business, and indeed I was one of the business people, and there wasn't enough of us others, I've got to say, who were out, making very, very strong arguments for Remain, and, trying to do my best to point out the difficulties that we would end up having, particularly on alignment of standards, the difficulty we would end up on potential tariffs in the automotive industry with rules of origin. And I can tell you, having conversations with the likes of Dominic Raab and David Davis and all of those people, it was just unbelievable. There was just no interest, no sort of understanding of the detail at all, and it was all a political mission, and they just thought that we were all scaremongering as business. So that's the sort of history. Now, I've moved on massively from that, and I guess, quietly, I do feel somewhat good about the fact that what we were pointing out has turned out to be the case. But actually, I make every effort, other than in groups like this, to not point that out, because I think really it's the right thing for us to do, to just sort of play the smart game here, and just let the statistics bear themselves out. And I do think, and the statistics are the data is all showing that this has been a huge failure. Now, of course, we do need, and I absolutely value the European movement for everything that you do, and Best for Britain, it is helpful if you have somebody just drip feeding, what an absolute disaster this is, and that's good. But that doesn't mean that business people or our Liberal Democrat politicians need to constantly sort of go on about this, in my view. I think what we should be doing, and it's very much what Daisy was just saying, is really sort of being the adults in the room and saying, look, we're in a damn mess. Brexit has been a big part of creating the mess we're in, and we are going to come up with the practical solutions of how to fix that. And that's very much the space that I'm in, and it is the space that I believe that most business people are in. Now, I chaired a conference called Trade Unlocked, which was organised by Best for Britain, that some of you will know, fairly recently, and we've got about 500 people in the room of businesses in all sectors, and the whole mood in the room was, we've just got to find some practical solutions to solving the problems that we have got on the mountains of red tape and not being able to get people into this country from the European Union because of the visa stuff and all the rest of it. And the business community, and I am speaking for the business community, they're definitely not in a rejoin European Union space. They are just, the business community are just so, quite frankly, just tired of all the chop and change, the challenges, of course, COVID, energy prices and all the rest of it. The last thing that I think we want is just, to start throwing up a whole argument, and the whole nation starts getting into this, divisive debate again. So it's very much about a pragmatic, can we just take some of the key problems off the table? So I'm very much supportive of the sort of step-by-step approach, but let's be clear, the ultimate long game is to join the single market and the customs union, so ultimately that's what we want. But I do agree with Daisy that we might just have to find some different language, because, it's sort of single market customs union, it just sounds a little bit like you're going back to something, whereas I think we need to find the language about something, optimistic about, where we're actually going. And that is it is a political nuance that I'm putting on it. At the end of the day, it will be that we are in the place of totally alignment to standards, and of course that says that we're in the single market, but I think that's a way we could lead. So at Trade Unlocked, we were talking about beneficial standards, alignment on beneficial standards, working together, and and the fact that, look, we've been in an experiment, and the experiment has been to deregulate and find economic advantage through deregulation. And look, how many attempts have we had? Nobody has found the advantage. what we have found is the disadvantages. Our rivers are polluted, our air quality is going backwards. We've now got 30 pesticides that are allowed in the United Kingdom that are banned by the European Union, and none of this is what the business community wants. So I think bringing those sorts of arguments that then edges back towards that argument of total alignment of standards, and in the end we just sort of take it from there. And the other thing that I think that is changing the mood is that actually the European Union is changing. It's not going to be that long until there will be a move to get the Ukraine into the European Union. You'll get Moldova into the European Union. And at that point, actually, you can bring the argument, look, we may be able to actually, as Britain, sort of be a bit of a leader in a new pact to say, what would a movement of those countries look like in terms of our access to the single market, which could look like something a little bit different to the model that we've had to now, but really does bring us the same advantages in terms of reducing the friction on trade. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Just a couple of bits of my CV that Nick missed, one of which is I'm Vice President of this movement, which I'm very proud of. The second is I think I made a distinctive contribution to the English language with bollocks to Brexit. I have to say I was tempted to come along to this meeting with one of the badges on, and then I realised this probably wouldn't be terribly well received by the management, so I rather backed off that. But I think we've all indicated in our different ways that we know that there is a big debate going on in the party about getting the right balance. That on the one hand, there is a passionate feeling, that we are a European party, we want to be positive about it, proud of it, continue to engage with it, joining in Europe, being part of it. On the other hand, we don't want to reopen this doom loop arguments, endless, circular, nasty, Brexit or not Brexit, going back over the things that happened in 2016. That's not helpful. So the mood I sort of picked up is, on the one hand, pragmatic. We need to find practical solutions, but also principled that we are part of Europe and that's where we want to be, and we want to talk about it and shout about it. I think the link to this practical discussion on business is this, that I sense this rather frustrating kind of arguments where on the one people say there is a problem called Brexit and there's something over here called the cost of living crisis, and somehow we have to choose which is the most important. But actually, it's all part of the same phenomenon. Right? I mean, the reason we have a cost of living crisis is complex, but my colleagues at the LSE tell me about a third of the rise in food prices is directly attributable to the costs of Brexit. And they're going to grow, actually, because the government has repeatedly postponed the introduction of sanitary testing and veterinary testing at the frontiers. And when it happens, there will be a big hit to food prices. Yes. So this is an ongoing issue. And there is a direct link to the economy and public spending. I have a chart which I show students, which is very telling, which is the trend in business investment since the Second World War. And there's a fairly steady trend, and it continues upward through the coalition era. And then 2016, the chart stops, flattens. Business investment stopped, effectively. It's beginning to come back a bit, and that was part of a big hit to the British economy. You can argue about the numbers, but we're a smaller, poorer economy than we would have been if Brexit hadn't happened. And that, in turn, affects the amount of government revenue, and it affects the amount of spending, and all the issues which people are agonising about in the health service and so on, directly feed back into the Brexit process. So it can't be separated out as a distinctive problem. And it's not just that it can't be separated out. There are continuing issues affecting the business community. It wasn't that Brexit got done. I mean, they signed a treaty, but it hasn't been done. And there are continuing problems which will continue for years. And I thought it might be helpful just to go over a few of them, slightly technical points. But I met a guy in the conference, a lobby conference, from the chemical industry, who I knew when I was doing the industrial strategy in government. The chemical industry is quite an important part of our remaining manufacturing industry. And the chemical industry for many years was governed by a set of regulations called REACH, which aligns technical standards across Europe. And the industry grumbled about it because it was very costly, but they did it, and it means that there is an integrated market in Europe for chemical products. And we have firms investing in Britain because they're part of Europe and they follow those standards. Now, it was assumed that after Brexit, the government would continue REACH regulations in some form. But then, a year ago, one of my successors, a man called Rhys Mogg, who you may have heard of, became business secretary. I think he only lasted 5 weeks, but in those 5 weeks he managed to do quite a lot of damage. And one of those bits of damage was insisting that all British regulations must in future have a Union Jack, and they must be rewritten regardless of whether there is any industrial logic, whatever. And so he insisted that we have a new set of regulations for the chemical industry, which would probably cost hundreds of millions, if not billions. Sunak then came in, and his office sent a message saying, don't worry, it is not going to happen. They're now being told that the government has yet to make up its mind. We're either going to have a British standard or a European standard. We're thinking about it, we're consulting about it, and meantime, nobody is willing to invest in the chemical industry because they don't know what the hell is the regime under which they have to operate. Let me take another area, which is trade negotiations. So something I did a lot of in government. I had this wonderful moniker of President of the Board of Trade, and I used to go around the world negotiating, actually on behalf of Europe, trade agreement. And one of the arguments that the Brexiteers have advanced, that although we may have lost access to the single market, we can offset that by trade agreements somewhere else. Actually, they're not equal because the single market's so much bigger than the remaining areas in which it's possible to have an independent trade agreement. But anyway, it's got a certain amount of popular appeal, we discovered in opinion polls. And it might actually have produced something. But the two biggest countries in the world with which we could have a useful trade agreement, the Americans are not interested, and they couldn't get it through Congress. And the biggest, which is China, there are all kind of geopolitical problems which I don't need to go into. So we were then left with Australia, produced an agreement where there are so many noughts in the decimal point that the benefits are virtually negligible. And the man who actually negotiated it, who was a man called Eustace, a Tory Minister of Agriculture, has publicly said it's actually cost us more than the benefits. So then we've got India, right, the great hope that we're going to get an agreement with India. And I can assure you, I've been there, and it's hard work. India is a very protectionist country. But anyway, we're going to get an agreement with India, based largely on access for Scotch whisky. Well, trying to sell more whisky in a nation of teetotalers is perhaps not the most visionary perspective on international trade. But I'm sure you can find a few drinkers amongst 1.4 billion people. But to hinge our international trade policy on a trade agreement with India just illustrates the ludicrous pettiness of what we're now reduced to with these post-Brexit trade agreements. And I'll just make one other example. one of the things that happened last week, which I thought was actually qualified good news, was that a step was taken to, I suppose, save the British steel industry. You know, Port Talbot and potentially Scunthorpe, which is a Chinese-owned company. And the government has sort of negotiated to replace the blast furnaces with electric arcs, which are more compatible with having green technology in the long run. But the Tata plant in Wales, that's 600 million for starters, and the Scunthorpe plant will probably cost the same. The taxpayers' money, of course the owners will put some money in. But now I knew from my own experience as a minister that when you negotiate with these tough multinational companies, it's a fantastic help to have the European Commission at your back. Because they have what they call a state aid system. And if you go to them and you say, I want to subsidise the steel industry or the car industry by X million pound, they will say no. Because, you know, there's a race to the bottom, you're competing with the Spanish and the Italian. No, we're not going to approve it. And so they beat the sum down and down. Eventually they agree. I can't ever remember a state aid case being refused, but they were very tough, and the companies know that. We've lost that. And what has happened is that the companies we're now dealing with have enormously enhanced bargaining powers against one country bidding against a lot of other European countries because they're not subject to the same rules. And, you know, there are many, many other problems which are arising now on a day-to-day basis. But as Jürgen said, you know, businessmen are business people, right? They're practical guys. You know, some of them have taken a hit and moved on. Some of them it's not really affected. But a lot of them are being hurt, and they'll continue to be hurt, but they want practical solutions. And although there is an issue around the language about single market and custom union, I mean, that is the objective which we have committed to ourselves as a party to aim towards through a practical, staged roadmap, right? And that takes us, I hate this word rejoin because we should be looking forward rather than back. And that takes us, in due course, into a close association with the European Union. And if we're looking forward, we need to be aware that in 10 years' time, beyond 10 years, Europe will not be the same, remotely the same as it is today.
Remotely.
I mean, as you may know who you're in the hall, I've just come back from Ukraine. One of their key objectives when they won this war is to get into the European Economic Union. They're completely baffled as to why we left and just don't understand. Anyway, they want to join. It will change Europe fundamentally. They, Moldova, other countries. And the kind of Europe that will then emerge is probably something much more flexible, different levels, incorporating a lot of things which we would like to see as a country. But you have to have a clear roadmap. It's no good the kind of the Starmer approach, which is well-intentioned, I think, but saying we'll solve this problem, that solve and that problem, that. But the European Union do not negotiate that way. They want a structure. I mean, I've dealt with Mr. Barnier, and he has this little book. You know, do you want to be Albania, Turkey, Norway? You know, and that's, you know, you choose from the menu, right? And there aren't any other dishes on the menu. You can't just pick and choose. You've got to decide what structure you want. And the importance of the customs union, the single market, is it's clear and the European unions know what you want. And so we have a roadmap. It's parties agreed to it. We should be very clear that's what we're going for. And as Jürgen said, we may need to play with the vocabulary, that being part of the European Union is our long-term objective, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about shouting from the rooftops that that's what we want. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, the focus of our discussion is the impacts of Brexit, particularly on business, and pragmatic steps that we can take to try and improve this and get ourselves into a closer trading relationship with the European Union. Does anybody have a question on that subject? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Hanya, I'm a Lib Dem member from Leicester and a former grassroots activist from Partnership for Europe. So Brexit is bad. It's bad for small businesses, and we know why. Some of those reasons have been outlined by the panel, but we knew before why Brexit was going to be very harmful for business. So the things that are pointed out in this document, I imagine, will be quite... won't bring anything new, I imagine, apart from perhaps the specific examples and the specific stories. So why did the public allow this to happen? Because they didn't know. Nobody told them really what Brexit meant for businesses or many other aspects as well. European movement didn't tell them, the media didn't tell them, and they were getting very mixed messages from politicians. So my question for European movement is, what are you going to do to make this known in the wider public? What are you going to do to make this, to raise public awareness of this? I'm talking about getting endorsements from local businesses, mass media, let's say mainstream media, supporting local groups in local media, and many, many other initiatives that you could do to access the wider public, and I mean beyond European movement mailing list, the wider public. And on the point about language, I would suggest to Jürgen, and Daisy unfortunately is gone, but as Liberal Democrats, actually maybe we should not simply be reflecting back to the public the misguided views that they already hold. Perhaps we should be setting the public discourse and setting the media agenda and offering a vision for an alternative future.
Thank you. I think the gentleman in front had a question.
He wants to how you promote
Panel and Mr. Cable. Yeah, sorry. Is this working?
I think believe it is, yes.
Yeah. Not working. I'll shout then. I'm Robert Smith. I'm from East Hampshire. I'm a Tory renegade, and I'm delighted to be here. I enjoyed reading your book enormously. I have it with me. My question is, why are we not talking about the AI Act, the European AI Act, which is going to turn the European Union into the world's regulator for all AI, and anybody who's going to trade with Europe is going to have to adhere to AI, and this is absolutely the right way to do it, and it's different music to what we've heard before.
Thank you, and I'll take a third one. Yes, lady there.
Hi, I'm an associate professor at the University of Exeter in Biosciences. So I'm not in business as such, but of course a lot of what we discover leads into business. So you'll know that we're just rejoining the Horizon programme. In the past, the rule has been that any one country in a network, you have to have a network around Europe to be in the programme, is allowed up to 40% of the share of the funding. Now, we in the UK have nearly always been the 40% partner. Everyone round the Europe wants to have our expertise in their network. So for things like antimicrobial resistance, pesticide resistance in crops, diseases that cross between the two barriers, all kinds of green technology. This is where we can't do it alone in the UK. We need our European partners. Now that we're back in the system, I suggest we use this as a positive story going forward. If we can try to get the media on board with the good news stories that come out of these networks, then it will all be much more golden and not retrograde looking. So that's what I would suggest.
I'll take one more and then come back to the panel. Yes.
I'm Jack Bell. I'm a member from Edinburgh. And one thing I noticed when the EU vote came through is that it reignited potentially another barrier within the UK. It promoted the idea that the only way for Scotland to rejoin is to follow the SNP and rejoin the EU by building another border between Scotland and England. So I was just wondering how we can sell the idea that it is good for business and it's possible for us to rejoin as one country. And if you think about it, we will all benefit if we all would join as one country, because from a business point of view, Eurotunnel, the big gateway to Europe is in England, and should the people in Scotland decide we'll rejoin just as Scotland, they'll be geographically cut off from the rest of you and they don't have Eurotunnel. So that is my main reason why there should be no border between Scotland and England, and we should all rejoin as one country.
Thank you.
And can I endorse, I'm Jackie Bell, no relation, but I'm from the Slovenia border, a few miles away, and you know, that we're still wearing better together.
Very good. Now, I'll pick up the questions about the European movement, but Vince, is there anything from that set of questions?
Yeah, I'd like to say something about the question on AI, which I thought was very good and takes us forward. And, you know, the government actually deserves some credit for taking the lead in organising this international conference. But what will matter in the long run about artificial intelligence-based industries, which is very much the future, is who sets the standards. Yes. And there are three emerging standards. One is in America, which is very permissive, which may be okay, but there are lots of risks. The second is in China, which is actually in a way more advanced than anywhere else, but which is very tightly controlled by the state and the Communist Party for obvious reasons. And then the third is the European Union, which is trying to get a blend of control and innovation and, you know, market incentives. And where Britain fits in all this, God knows. You know, I mean, we will either have to choose one of those three, or we may try to do our own, which will be ignored because we're no longer a global power. And actually, that issue highlights more than any other, I think, you know, why Brexit is an issue moving forward, quite apart from the things that have already happened.
Good. Well, maybe reflecting on the sort of the media, and also, you know, picking up on your specific point about Horizon. You know, my view is it depends what the objective of the media is that you were talking about, and my view is that, you know, we need to be very cautious of trying to get a big media campaign out there and sort of, you know, saying to everybody, well, you know, this is why it's all been wrong and all the rest of it, because, you know, it will just turn the next general election debate into Brexit, and we don't want the next general election debate to be about Brexit. The next general election debate has got to be about the many failings of this government. You know, the fact that they've just backtracked on net zero, the fact that we can't build any hospitals or schools, the fact that they're just about to scrap HS2. You know, we need all of these arguments to be coming out, and if you allow, and the media would absolutely they'd love to rerun this Brexit debate, they'd love it, and then we'd all be in this muddle. So I'm not a fan of sort of, you know, media for the sake of media and for the sake of sort of, you know, saying how terrible it all was. What I am a fan of is running very specific campaigns on the step-by-step approach of what we need to ultimately get back to the single market and the customs union. You know, and I was party to the campaign on Horizon. I was you know, very much party to helping organise that. And then now we need to go on, you know, a veterinary agreement to make sure that we can get, you know, all of the standards alignments, and particularly the border that we have with Northern Ireland, which comes to your point a little bit, because you know, we can't have these sorts of borders within the country. You know, then there's things like travelling musicians and sorting out the visa arrangements for them. And literally on every one of these issues, you know, you run a campaign, you know, you educate as to why this is a right idea, but everyone is just a small step that sort of takes us back, and in a way that is exactly what's happening. I mean, I'm, by the way, convinced that reach will soon be scrapped, because there's no way this government can get it through before the general election anyway. So this thing that Vince was talking about reach will just go away, and the chemical industry will be able to associate itself on chemical standards back with the European Union. That'll be another win, and we'll just notch all of these wins up, and then eventually we'll say, well, look, I mean, we now sort of join whatever the language is, we join this new European light with some other countries, and hey presto, we're back in the single market.
Well, I'll just address the comms point, if I may. I mean, it is simply not true that nobody told people in 2016 about the impacts that Brexit would have on business. Certainly the European movement did, the Liberal Democrats did, the Stronger In campaign did. Now, you can argue they didn't do it very well, and possibly the outcome would tell you about that. But the idea that people weren't told is just simply not true. They chose to believe other things that they heard in preference to listening to those warnings. Some of them were extraordinarily badly delivered. George Osborne and his Project Fear tried to convince everybody that the world would end by about mid-October that year if they voted to leave in June. And of course, it was always the case that the damage was going to be done over a much longer period of time than that. And that sort of absurd exaggeration of the whole thing was entirely counterproductive, and nobody ever really sold the vision of why working as part of the European Union was good and beneficial. It was all just scare tactics. Now, you ask the question, what can the European movement do now to get these things more widely known? I wish that we had the shooting power in the media to be able to suddenly get a greater awareness of all these issues across. I wish the Liberal Democrats did, but the reality is we work within our own networks. We push messages out very vigorously through social media with a reach way, way, way beyond our own membership. But the only way we can really do that over the sustained period of time that it's going to take is by doing exactly what Jürgen was just talking about, which is taking one aspect at a time and making as much as we can in communication terms of that, and building a narrative as time goes on. Because if you just try and rerun the whole argument in a macro sense at once, it's not going to work. Nobody's going to listen, and you're not going to succeed. I'd also just pick up this point about division. We are very clear as the European movement, we are a cross-party, all-party grouping, but if ultimately we are going to win a vote of the British people to go back into the European Union, we have to be able to bring into the tent people who voted leave and people who identify as conservatives. And we have to build a big enough tent for those people to come in comfortably and allow themselves to be convinced that their future lies in the European Union. And you cannot do that if you do this in a divisive or negative way. I know it's funny to see people with stickers on their lapels saying bollocks to Brexit. It was a very good slogan in 2019, which Vince's party leader and I as chief executive were delighted to promote and endorse. The next line was hashtag we told you so. No, 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 no. This is 180 degrees diametrically opposite from anything that is going to work as a message. We told you so is just absolutely where we cannot be. It is absolutely toxic. The reason Get Brexit Done worked as a slogan was it actually appealed even to some people who had voted Remain. People were just absolutely at their wits' end and fed up with it. And I think the country is in a state of post-traumatic stress disorder, still even now, about Brexit and both the 2016 and the 2019 sagas of that. And one of the key healers of PTSD is time. And if you reopen the issue in a divisive way, you just reopen the wounds. And the first law of madness in politics is that if you keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, you're in for a massive disappointment. We have got to approach this in a different, entirely different way. Some more questions? Yes, David Grace.
David Grace. I'm a former deputy chairman of the European movement. I'm sorry we didn't do a better job in the referendum. Daisy, and I've heard Ed Davies say the same thing, says what we have to do is talk to people and listen to people, the things that concern them. And she mentioned in particular cost of living and the NHS. I completely agree with that. But when people raise these issues, why not, as part of the answer, say that joining the single market would be part of the solution? I don't think you can go out on the doorstep and start nattering on about the single market. And I wouldn't use the word Brexit. You're not looking back, you're looking ahead. You're saying these problems could be solved, or it would help a great deal if we join the single market. And that's the opportunity to say it. And I haven't heard any of our MPs taking that opportunity, actually. I wish they would. And the other thing that's said is that we've got to take the country with us, we've got to wait till the country's ready. The country's not going to get ready on its own.
Absolutely.
We've got to be part of changing opinions. The country wasn't with Nigel Farage 30 years ago, but he didn't wait. He kept on about it for 30 years. And we need to be part of that change. And I suggest a practical example. Every Liberal candidate will have a business in their constituency that has suffered because of not being in the single market. And you find that business, you make that example. It's not the general principle, it's a specific example that locally we're suffering, and it would be better if we joined the single market. That's a very practical step.
Thank you, David. I would take gentleman in front of you.
Hi, Warwick Smith, Waverley. I absolutely agree with what David said. I absolutely agree with following the roadmap. I passionately put forward we should be saying these are the benefits rather than talking about what's gone wrong and threat. Do we really need a referendum after that?
Gentleman in the right shirt.
Thank you. I'm David Robinson from Mid Dorset and North Poole. After the referendum, I was frustrated when Theresa May refused to ask the people who voted for Brexit why they had voted for it, because I think it left her in a position where she was trying to negotiate but without knowing what she was trying to achieve. She couldn't know what to hit and where to yield. So my question is, do we know why people voted for Brexit? And if not, is it worth finding out in order to frame our reconciliation with Europe?
And I'll stick the gentleman here and then we'll come back to the panel.
Thank you. Julian Woodward from Banbury. In the darkest post-referendum years, there were lots of reports that for business to get access to ministers, there was a very clear message that they must not step out of line. They must not criticise Brexit. We've still got the same Tory government, however much they think they've changed their spots or would like to convince people. Assuming there is a change of government and we have Prime Minister Keir Starmer, which seems extremely likely, what impact will that have on how business is willing to address this issue, speak out, engage with the public?
Interesting question.
Well, I'm delighted to. I mean, first of all, I do agree with your point on the single market. I was one of the groups that was pulled together to write the 4-stage document, which ultimately ended up in joining the single market. I think it will be extremely helpful to always frame it around, and these are the advantages that it will bring you. I think that's always the way. And I do think it's quite easy to do because people don't really understand the single market. I mean, it is is a complex. I mean, it is the most sophisticated, trade market in the whole world, and I mean, in the whole world, and it is a huge privilege to be a part of it. Way more advantageous than this CP, TPP, and all the rest of it. But people don't understand it. So therefore, to just frame it in a way, look, this is why. And actually, the fact that our air quality is getting worse in our cities, the fact that nobody is holding us to account on cleaning up our rivers, these are the sorts of things that you can say, because these are all level playing field matters. So I do agree. On your point, I mean, this has been a huge frustration of mine. I've set up a social enterprise called Vocal, VOCL .uk, and the whole purpose of Vocal is to nurture and work with next generation business leaders to engage in public and in policy discourse in a very positive and in a responsible way, because I and a number of other business leaders who have formed this group have exactly your concern. So we have to work hard, and it's a really important point. There is a next generation of business leaders, who have just been watching this horrible debate, and also, and people like me, I mean, I'm really having a go at government at the moment, because I'm just at my wit's end with the irresponsibility of what's going on in terms of this net zero, high speed 2, but their inability on anything to keep consistency. But the next generation is sitting there going, my goodness, do you have to be this angry? I don't want, So I think it will go away. Don't go away, but I think we will be able to build a different environment. And I am engaging quite a lot with the Labour Party as well as with the Lib Dems, and I just think there is going to be a calming, and I think we will be able to get back to partnership with business. The partnership between business and government is broken.
Vince.
Well, just to add to the last point, I think that one of the things that will happen with the next government is the continuation of something we did when I was in government, and which actually under Theresa May's period as well, where you did have what we call an industrial strategy, the purpose of which is A, thinking long term, and B, business and government talking and collaborating rather than treating each other as enemies. So I think that kind of institutional structure will happen. On your other point, I mean, which we can't really resolve, I think, there's been a lot of number crunching about the makeup of Brexit and Remain voters, and sadly, I mean, they're pretty deep-rooted things. I mean, age was the most important factor, and the Grim Reaper is the only person who will resolve that problem. And the other was, education and social class. I saw this as an MP when I first started. I got my biggest vote in the council estates, and I never went anywhere near the big houses. And by the time I'd finished, we were knocking up the big houses, and they were all Lib Dems, and we went into the council estates with great trepidation. And that I'm afraid it summarises what was going on.
Yes, indeed. And I think that most pollsters would say it's far too long after the event now to attempt to analyse. People won't even remember how they vote, much less why. But we'll take a few more contributions. Richard Morris.
Richard Morris from the European Movement UK and European Movement International in Brussels. Listening to the three of you talk, it would almost not seem like a political debate at all. I think everything that you say as business people makes 100% sense. But we are at a Lib Dem conference, and I think it's quite extraordinary that the only two debates of this depth and seriousness about Europe have been at Fringe meetings, this one and the one at 1 o'clock today, and not a single thing in the main auditorium at all on this subject. And I'm desolated that Daisy has already left us, and so that the high command of the Lib Dems are not hearing this extraordinarily important discussion. And also, I mean, although it makes sense what you say as business people, surely politicians should be speaking out. I mean, almost as if the way you're talking, it wouldn't matter whether there was a Lib Dem, a Labour, or a Conservative government in place. You would argue the same. What we need is the Lib Dems to take a much more high-level impression of the damage from Brexit, to talk about the absolute nature of the European Union as a limited pooling of sovereignty for the common good, which is something absolutely in line with Lib Dem values. And I agree, not to rejoin now and get on the streets, but sowing the seeds as to why intellectually the European Union is so extraordinarily important, and we should have absolutely an ambition to return to the mainstream of Europe and how it affects every single other policy which is being debated at this conference.
Lady again.
I just want to make the point that I don't think people have necessarily forgotten. Oh, sorry.
I'm not sure if it'll help you. Switch it on. I think they're largely for recording purposes
yes. I was just going to say, I don't know if people have necessarily forgotten, from what I can hear, that the reasons why people might have voted leave are primarily, and obviously to me, is because lack of sovereignty, that they believe that we were losing that the UK was losing that. Secondly, immigration, and thirdly, jobs. And I think we can't proceed further without listening to that and trying to convince leavers how we're going to work with Europe. And one of the building blocks work with that, but trying to retain our sovereignty, perhaps, if that's possible still. I know they rejected it before and they wanted us to become closer and closer, and doing these things, how are we going to deal with immigration? I mean, it's a very sensitive point with the small boats at the moment, and how we're going to deal with jobs in the future, and I think all those things are really important.
Just to say, Vince was very good that he came up to Norwich and opened one of our premises for the Lib Dems, and my wife and I are very involved in that premise, and it needs maintenance. And I'll tell you what, there isn't any Lib Dem tradesmen. There are no Lib Dem tradesmen. There's no blue collar workers. You're all professionals. You don't understand how the blue collar worker thinks, and this is the crux of the argument with the referenda and the European issue. There are a lot of people we do not engage with, and that's not just the Lib Dems, I mean, but as professionals, the only time we see blue-collar tradesmen is when they step over our door to repair some plumbing and things of that nature. And that's one of the major
Thank you. Now, I'm getting worried signs from the back that we are apparently expired our room booking. Have we got time to hear 5 minutes ago? I'm sorry, I was working under the impression that we had a little longer than that. But thank you all for coming. Please join the European movement, the only organisation out there explicitly campaigning on the European issue at the moment. We would very much welcome more Lib Dems among our number. Thank you.